Good afternoon, everybody.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Daniel Giblin. I'm an independent consultant, but I'm also a director of Lightweight Community Transport Limited and Light Rail UK Limited. My history is, half of my career was in British Rail in senior management positions mostly, and the latter half was in major consultancies and senior positions like Jacobs Engineering and Arcadis, working for the World Bank, European Commission, lots of private banks, and other companies like McKinsey and PwC, Ernst & Young and the like, partnering on major projects, many of which were tram projects. Please forgive me because I don't have a set of slides. I've just come back from holiday. And, but my notes will be available afterwards online. I promised that to Gordon. So, I think firstly it's a new era for trams. And I think that the century is shaping up quite well for trams. But I think financially we're at a sort of pivotal moment. And so really what I would like to talk about is the pursuit of the purse strings. And it's really building on what Tim has been saying there, because that's the foundation of how all of this works. And hopefully I can give you some examples of what we've been doing to try and make the financial side work. But it is critical to set out a roadmap. And the roadmap for funding trams and light rail has got to take account of some of these financial issues, because financial engineering is as complex as light rail engineering. And it's critical that we almost work back from financial close so that that's in everybody's minds all the time. Now, in terms of the roadmap that I'm thinking about, which builds on the roadmap that Tim was talking about, the LRTA and Light Rail UK have built up what I think is a really good list of projects, about 80 in the UK, including the third tramway, which we've been pushing quite hard on through the all-party parliamentary group over the last few years. But that list of about 80, many of which are blue skies, but they can be made into effective projects over the next 30 years. And the planning has to be on a 30 to 50 year cycle in this. You know, it's not a bus solution which you can implement right away. I was talking to a bus Supremo recently, and he said, I agree that trams are a good thing, and buses are sometimes just put in as a sticking plaster, short term, to try and resolve the situation of politics in the 5-year cycle. So Tram Tracker, which is this list of projects, it's now been shortlisted on the Government's Department of Transport's Ideas Fund for £50,000 to upgrade it and bring into SAP and Oracle business software using very advanced technology. And I believe what will then happen is that tool is available to councils and to the government, to anybody who wants it really. I'm hoping it will be open source, to actually build up business plans. And so as we build up business plans, and of course it will look at critical analysis, and it will look at all of the issues to try and define the costs and define the revenues and define the footfall and define the fare box as well. All of that cash flow activity will be built into it, and then you can get towards the basis of a good business case. And so that's Tram Tracker. I think that's worth everybody supporting that and actually using it. On a Zoom call recently, which I was on, I'm sure everybody's been Zooming tremendously over the last year or so. And quite good fun, but it's great to be back in person again, talking to people and communicating. Very sociable. But Ian Stewart, who's the head of the HSBC in the UK, he said that he has substantial funds to support the government in building back better. And I would take into account of that. But the basic point that he's saying is the money is not free. And they are quite sniffy about what they're going to put their money into. So the prospectus is extremely important. And building up that prospectus using the financial case is absolutely critical to talking to these banks. There's no point going with a technical plan, you've got to go with a financial plan. But it's a call to action to take advantage of not only HSBC, all the banks are doing it. And a sort of call to action is something that we've been doing with LCT and Lightroom UK, where we took the initiative with a local organisation called Zero West in Bristol to prepare a pre-feasibility study for Bristol Tram. And that was submitted, and it rocked the boat a bit. A lot of people didn't like it, other people thought it was okay. A hell of a lot of hard work went into it, particularly by two gentlemen that you know, Jim Harkins and Mike Gibson. And the pre-feasibility study, it's showing the routes, etc., but we began to win councillors over. And the mayor began to use the word tram, perhaps where they weren't using it before. So that's a bit of proof that you can actually take some action, almost from the lobbying basis, and turn it into a written plan, which then influences quite significantly. And we're invited to participate in the WECA consultation in Bristol Region Rapid Transport Plan that's going to be debated next month. Going back to HSBC, what we are now saying is, having done this pre-feasibility study, the next case is actually building that into prospectus with a business case and a financial case, and promoting that at the next stage. So I'm pleased to see that type of activity is actually happening, and we can move things forward. So HSBC is one group, but we've started to talk with a lot of organisations. Now, I've got a list here of about 15, which I'll put in my notes rather than go through them all. Excuse me. But to give you a practical example of how we can interact with the financial world and indeed with major contractors who are capable of investing. One major contractor who built trams spoke to us, and we gave guidance, again using the tram tracker approach, to help them build their marketing plan for light rail for the UK. I was absolutely delighted to speak to them about that, because we discovered that they have fantastic engineering, but they don't have the nuance and the subtlety of what's happening on the front line. But organisations like UK Tram and LRTA and certain individuals and small companies do. And so we have to sort of transfer our knowledge into the plans of these outfits. I think that marketing plan will come out quite soon, and we should be all over it to see how we can help them support a number of those tram tracker projects throughout the UK. There's another organisation, an international banking organisation, which has an innovation unit, and they're basically scanning the world for innovative transport projects, and they've begun to show interest in some of the ultra light rail projects that we've got and the kit that we have as a basis of an emerging industry in the UK, something which they don't do. So again, that's an example of action that we can take on the financial front to get interest going, to influence, but to seek to bring finance into the real world. So we shouldn't have any doubt, of course, that funding approval is a big challenge, and funders and sponsors have got to build bankable schemes which are affordable. And as consortia are created to tender and compete for emerging tram schemes, the funding element is absolutely critical in terms of the success of the project. So, in terms of this process of trying to build up the awareness, there are, again, a list of 15 grant schemes. For example, DEFRA's new one, which is on air quality, is a grant scheme that provides funding to local authorities. I was absolutely amazed to find that some local authorities didn't know about this. And we've begun to say to them, well, on a pro bono basis, we're prepared to help you write this and get trams into your application to improve air quality. And I'm pleased to say that there's at least one city council who said, great, let's work together on that. So I think we have to sell to all these grant organisations that trams are critical to the future of the clean air campaigns that we're having in the UK. There's a couple of really good examples of small companies in the ultralight rail arena which have won up to £300,000 on the Innovate UK arena. So trams can win in these type of grant activities. And I'm currently involved with T-Trig and the Ideas Fund. The Ideas Fund I mentioned earlier, 50,000 for the Tram Tracker one, which we're shortlisted for. There's a whole lot of other ones which are coming up, which I think we all need to be aware of, both as contractors and as councils, that there's money there which can be got at if you put it forward properly. So just moving from the funding side, which is almost the private sector, you've got to bear in mind that the private sector are in business to make money. They're entrepreneurial and they're profit-minded, and we have to put ourselves in their shoes and really understand that and make it happen for them, not be at loggerheads with them. But let's turn to the government side. I think there's some pretty positive signals coming out. Baroness Veer recently spoke at an event at the Royal Overseas League. It's on a YouTube channel. I'll leave it in the notes, but if you go to the YouTube and do Royal Overseas League, you'll find videos there. And there's one about trams, and she kicked it off and made some very, very positive statements. And I think what she basically was saying is that the levelling up approach and building back better are critical. And she was making the point that she believes there is a level playing field, and she's very open-minded to trams. Well, we debated that a little bit, and she said, well, look, can I have a copy of all the papers that were presented? And we gave that to her about 2 months ago. Now I'm hoping that will further help her to think about if there's a level playing field or not. Buses get subsidy, trams don't, for example. So, you know, the government, they do talk about voters, and they do talk about tax increases, and they do talk about the expense of trams. So we've got to really talk money back to them and put ourselves in their shoes and be part of that real reform that's going on. I mean, I mentioned to Baroness Veer, with my colleagues, that the figures that we had show that today there are 38 million registered motor vehicles in the UK. 38 million. In 2007, there were 27 million registered motor vehicles. And experts are now predicting that in the next couple of years, those numbers will rise to 40 million. And company car owners in the UK get subsidies of over 5 billion. That was the amount in 2019. So Baroness Veer's got quite a lot to think about in terms of how can we level up for trams. I think a good example that we've got involved in, it's another practical example of trying to do something to change attitudes and behaviours towards trams. We spoke with the Highways Agency, and the Highways Agency are now working with us on trying to resolve the carbon issues that they have as a consequence of owning trunk roads and motorways. And we're now working with them, with one of the people in the department and a senior director there, to identify 5 locations on motorways where we could have park and ride and a tram system, maybe an ultralight rail one, into specific towns for the last mile. And they're really keen on it, and I was absolutely astounded when they spoke positively about this. Because what we were saying is the 27 billion that they've got for road investment, a small proportion of that would make this happen. So that's one to keep an eye on, and indeed to support if you can get involved. And But I think, how can I put it? Chris Heaton-Harris, he's the Minister of State, he was on the Zoom recently, where we were all listening. And he said that his department doesn't really want feasibility studies. What he wants is a full business case. And indeed, he said, he doesn't want an outline business case. That's how I read it. So I think it's important to understand where they're coming from in terms of that particular point. Also, he said voters and customers want things like cashless ticketing, a lot of AI, a lot of high-tech information. Now, that's something that we tend not to sell too aggressively in the tram sector. I spent 3 years in Saudi Arabia working for the Ministry of Transport, and I led the regulatory unit there. And I had the honour and the pleasure of seeing how Riyadh Rapid Transit was planned, and it's about to be implemented shortly on tests. Okay, there's a lot of money on the public side going into that, but the private sector and the tendering processes, it was wonderful to watch how the mosaic actually worked, and the whole thing came together. So, I mean, so there's models there, but the important thing that I found out of that, I found out there was when I looked at some of the technology that was coming forward, it was outstanding, far greater than conventional rail, far greater than buses. So there's a hell of a lot of high tech that goes into trams that people are not aware of. But some people tend to see trams as sort of dinosaurs. So I think we should be pressing much more the high tech angle and include it in many of the presentations that we do. And the other point that Chris Heaton-Harris made, which I think is important, he was talking about the white paper for Great British Railways, and he emphasised the fact that they are going to have a long-term plan, which might be about 30 years. And part of that plan is going to be integration with local services at stations. Now, that's an opportunity for trams at many, many places around the UK to say, transfer from heavy rail to light rail. I don't think we've addressed that yet. So I think it would be helpful for us all, Andrew, Tim, Mike, if we got a hold of that plan in its early stages and really contributed to it, so that they are looking very, very positively, Great British, this white paper for Great British Railways, at how trams are built into that local integration of stations. We were talking over lunch about the need to try and influence politicians. And there's a project that I get involved in on the site. It's a Civitas project at the European Commission, the OECD. And they work also with the university in Coventry. And what they encourage is that many of the environmental benefits that we see encouraged, well, they push for that, put money behind it. But one of the things they do, which we spoke about, is that they encourage young people to get on the street with their placards, funded with an EU sign on the front and say, you know, clean air. But what happens is that you get people on the streets, not in the chat rooms, talking about pollution and the problems and solutions to it, of which trams are the solution. So maybe there needs to be more out of the chat rooms onto the front line, and as Diane said, maybe into the shopping centres and have a display there about trams so that we can start to influence public opinion and the voters the way the politicians do. And I think also we discussed at lunchtime the need for the powerhouse up north to be a levelling up down south, and Thurrock has obviously got to be part of that, and we have been pushing for that to try and make sure that this project is highly profiled. Because we have to continually push. So, I mean, we had conversations, again going back to this funding element from the government side, we had a conversation with Jesse Norman, who's the Financial Secretary at the Treasury now, and he was previously the Minister of State for Transport. And when we spoke to him, this was before COVID, maybe a year or so before COVID, he was saying that he was very interested in Tram Tracker and the 80 schemes. And so we sent him that list. Mike and I worked on it, you'll remember Mike. And since then he is a supporter. And this is what he said in the press, and I quote, "This is a great time to explore the incredible potential for light rail schemes across the country. The call for evidence seeks new ideas and new support for the next generation of light rail, so we can work with cities and towns across the UK to create new ones." Jesse Norman, when Transport Minister. So the idea is to create a healthier, active arena in cities and rejuvenate towns. So I think there is, there's people like him and Baroness Beer and Chris Heaton Harris that we can influence, and they have power. But I said some positive signs from government, and I meant that in the sense that the DfT call for evidence from the market is an important feature. The new acceleration unit in the Transport Secretary's department has put 360 million forward for transport projects, that we should try and grab some of that. And the new environmental bill, which is at the House of Lords for the third reading, we've got to push for more output from that is supportive of trams. But let me please, if I may, just talk about councils for a moment. Tim made the point strongly that local powers are important and achieving low carbon public transport. And it's quite interesting to look at the funding of schemes. 9% of taxes are retained by local councils in the UK. On the continent, about 25% of taxes are retained locally. So there may be room to develop the UK tax system to improve this issue. But a key issue is getting through the approvals approach. Now, we're involved with 3 cities at the moment, and we're talking about the planning applications. The planning application, as you know, can cost, in some cases, hundreds of thousands of pounds when you get all the lines and all the details and all the engineering laid down. And it's extremely difficult to get that through. We're helping one of the cities write their transport plan. Now, it's absolutely critical that a local council includes tram in its transport plan. We're actually at this moment doing a research, R&D investigation of all of the plans which have been laid out by all of the cities in the UK to see if they have tram in it. And if not, why not? And those who have started to say, we're very interested in tram, we've begun to give them advice because they don't have the technical advice themselves. So it's quite important that we have to change the minds of certain politicians and certain local councillors and MPs who are not for trams to be able to see the benefits of that. Now, you can actually do a pre-planning application for about £3,000. And I think we ought to be trying to do some of those pro bono, because once they're nailed to the desk of a mayor, at least it's got to look at it and it can change the debate, like I was saying about Bristol. So lobbying and pushing are extremely important. But I would also recommend that we need to really push with the planning consultants, the engineering consultants, the planning and engineering consultants, who are employed by the cities. Now, if you look at Bristol, for example, they have a framework contract for 4 years with one of the major outfits. That'll be about 4 million, and they just feed off that, and they push various projects into them. And I've been speaking with some of these organisations, and I've come from that background myself, and quite often they do not have the level of expertise in their outfits that we have here. So somehow we've got to get the level of expertise that we have in UK Tram and Light Rail and LRTA into these organisations, because what happens sometimes is that they just go to the market and get subcontractors to fulfil a contract that they've got with Bristol or whatever, and so it doesn't come out in our favour. So there's a lot of work to be done with the contractors to make sure that they really understand how trams can benefit a society. So that's something that we've got to be thinking about. Now, I got a report from McKinsey recently, which I'm sort of working through at the moment, and it's called The Future of Work. It's probably worth having a look at. It's all about flexibility, reskilling, and how people are going to work in the future. These people sort of set the vision, and sometimes they're followed blindly. I actually don't agree with this whole idea of just home working and flexible working and all these modern ideas. The people I speak to say, I can't wait to get back to the office. And the managers that I speak to, they say, well, I'm a modern manager, but I do like to keep tabs on my staff, and I can't always do that when they're at home. So I think we may well go back to the traditional way of people going to and from the office, maybe not 5 days a week. But what's happening is the whole question of the research of the footfall of passengers and the customer and passenger number planning has probably been scrabbled at the moment. There's a lot of work needed to be done to start doing, again, the post-COVID passenger flow numbers. And that is part of the enabling process which will benefit Trams. Well, I'm sure we've all touched on climate change. It's upon us and action needs to be done. And of course, transport is the highest emitting sector. So there needs to be much greater urgency on trams as well as electric cars and all the rest of it. We spoke about that 27 billion going into road building. The High Court stated that the environmental and climate change initiatives had not been built properly into that planning. So, and the Public Accounts Committee said that there wasn't really a plan there to meet the climate change targets 2 years after they had been set down. So these are important points that influence how governments work. And we need to align with those to ensure that trams are in there. But we've got to make sure that the projects are bankable. We've got to make sure that they are affordable. We've got to make sure that the customers want them and that the planning is done properly. I think myself that in terms of climate change, there probably needs to be an inspectorate to regulate climate change objectives. And as part of that, to take account of tram within the regulatory organisation. I'd like to just touch briefly on ultralight rail, where I'm quite deeply involved these days. And obviously ultralight rail is significantly cheaper than standard trams. And there's some great companies around that I'll list on my notes. And there's a whole series of about 10 projects where ultralight rail can work. And we've started to talk to organisations. One of our experts understands home building and how that whole planning approach is done. And so we're now trying to encourage developers who are involved, the contractors who are involved in building estates, to start thinking about building in ultra-light rail rather than buses and not having so much car parking. So I think that's an area that is certainly worth developing and looking at. And these are very high tech, and the next generations of trams and ultralight rail have got to emphasise all of these points about being high tech, about being customer oriented, and about being right for climate change. And if we can get the maths right, there's some great opportunities ahead.